Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
I'm really excited about today's interview because it is a subject that every ministry leader has to deal with at some point or another, because churches are built upon, we rely on a volunteer base to make ministry happen. And Matt Morgan is going to be teaching us how to not only recruit volunteers, but also move them into leadership to help continue to disciple them and raise them up to be leaders of leaders. A discipleship pipeline or factory there, so to speak. And it got us talking about volunteer culture off the air and how at different seasons, at least in my experiences, I've been at churches where it's like seems to be pulling teeth to find people to fill the roles. And fortunately, God has blessed me with a church family right now that serving is never typically a problem. Getting volunteers at our church is not the problem. Really, our biggest challenge is to make sure when we do put a word out for volunteers, because we know how our people respond, is to make sure each person has a role and a job to do so they feel valued when they get there to that event or whatever it is, because we have an overabundance of volunteers. And this is very rare. I realize that, and it's new territory for me, which I am very much enjoying this season, where we do have quite a few people that are really engaged.
That's awesome. We have a similar culture. We've been at our church now for 3 years, and we don't have a volunteer issue. And something that's been so intriguing to me that I've loved is there are safeguards set up in our church to where each ministry wants to make sure that the soul of the server is healthy, and that, so it's 2 on 1 off or 2 on 2 off, so that there's time for them to worship with their family and worship, and be a part of, in church and not just at church, if that makes sense, where they're corporate, participating in corporate worship and growing as a disciple. And so they're serving out of discipleship growth instead of just volunteering for a position at church and checking it off the list. Obviously, we don't want just list checkers. We want investment. And that's what I love about this interview with Matt Morgan is there's a big delineation between just being a volunteer and holding a spot and having buy-in as a leader.
That's right. That's right. I want you guys, when you listen to him, he breaks this down for reasons why people don't volunteer, and then the values they build in. So I think we need to go listen, and then we're going to kind of argue over some of these points on the other side. And I look forward to some of the thoughts we have, really batting this around. Matt, take it away with your interview. We want to learn from you.
Introducing D6 Everyday Foundations, strengthening the building blocks of faith. We are thrilled to announce the launch of D6 Everyday Foundations, a groundbreaking curriculum designed to empower churches and families in their journey of faith. This innovative program aims to align the church and home, fostering a strong foundation and unshakable confidence in God's Word. D6 Everyday Foundations boasts a comprehensive 3-year scope, focusing on major themes and characters from the Bible while also addressing pertinent cultural issues. With this curriculum, we aim to equip individuals of all ages to stand firm in their faith and navigate the challenges of our ever-changing world. At the heart of D6 Everyday Foundations is a church and home partnership, recognizing the vital role both play in nurturing and cultivating a vibrant faith. Through this collaboration, families will be empowered to prioritize and emphasize God's Word in their daily lives. Together, let's lay the foundation for a generation grounded in truth and empowered to impact the world around them. Let's hold the building blocks of faith firmly in place. To order D6 Everyday Foundations and embark on this exciting journey of faith, visit d6family.com today.
Joining me today is Matt Morgan. Matt serves as campus pastor at Fellowship Bible Church in Maumelle, Arkansas. Prior to this role, he served in children's ministry for nearly 2 decades. He loves seeing people of all ages understand the richness of the gospel. He is husband to Dana and daddy to Maggie and Macy. Matt, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Got a lot of M's that I just said there.
We have a theme, and I won't go into it, but my brother, sister, were all M's, so it repeats.
And you told me you're a Mets fan, so Matt Morgan, Mets. Okay.
We keep it going.
All right. That's not what we're talking about today, unless we want to do a baseball podcast later.
Let's do that later.
We can do a little bit of rundown. But we are talking about a very important topic today, and I think this is something that's going to resonate with a lot of people, and that's moving from volunteer recruitment to leadership development. Now, I'm a volunteer in my church. I've been in full-time ministry in the church. I've also been a volunteer, so I've kind of seen both sides of it. And I know that finding volunteers, it's hard work, and that's probably a ministry in of itself. Like, you could actually have the minister of finding volunteers, and they would have a full-time job and probably be stressed and burned out and leave within 18 months. What makes that process of volunteer finding so exhausting?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say to ministry leaders is that, yes, it is exhausting. Like, if that's you, you're not alone in that season. I think it's also exhausting because there's always a need for more. Like, it's just a constant revolving door. And I've rarely met a ministry leader that says they're fully staffed. And if they are fully staffed, they're probably dreaming about what's next. And so they're looking for the next leader. And so it's just a never-ending job. Like you said, it could be someone's full-time job because it really never ends. We're always looking for the next leader or the replacement leader. I think it's also a little bit exhausting because we're not accustomed to the word no. Unless you had a background in sales, you come into ministry and you hear the word no, it's really devastating. And so I think you get a little exhausted just from hearing no, but no's not always a bad answer. It may be not yet. We may hear that as not right now, but it can be exhausting just hearing no 3 out of 4 times.
Now, with some things, like, some organizations have no problem finding volunteers. For example, a few years ago, NFL Draft comes to Nashville, Tennessee, and people flocked to volunteers. Yeah, I will definitely go work 12 hours a day if I can actually attend the draft. That's not an issue for things like that. With the church, a little bit different, because we're not just talking about like a one-off event, and they're not handing out free tickets to a game or something for that. What are some of the main reasons that people don't volunteer?
Yeah, I would say it is time, fear, and sometimes just a lack of awareness of the need that's there in the church. So many people just have calendars that are way too full. And as ministry leaders, we have to realize they're working 60 plus hours a week. They're raising kids. They're trying to be involved in the kids' extracurricular activities. They're trying to date their spouse. And then they're trying to squeeze every last second and minute for their own leisure, for their own recreation. And so volunteering is sometimes just something that's on the back burner. And so sometimes we can call it misplaced priorities, but as ministry leaders, we just simply need to realize that they're very busy. And that's one of the reasons they don't volunteer. It's also fear. Sometimes it's not knowing if they're equipped or if they're gifted enough to be working with kids or students or families. And so it's our job as ministry leaders to help them recognize their gifts, but also equip them for the areas that they might be fearful of, so that, and when it comes time for them to serve, they know exactly what's expected of them and they feel prepared for it. And then the last one, reason they don't volunteer, unfortunately, is we don't always do the best job of communicating needs. Sometimes in the church, we don't get outside of our ministry areas enough to go meet people who are maybe other parts of the church. We stay in the children's ministry or student ministry area, and we don't get out and meet other people to let them know, one, most importantly, the good things that God is doing in our ministry area, but two, the opportunities and the needs that are in our area.
Well, I want to throw something at you that's just something I've seen, something I've experienced. I've seen many volunteers fizzle out very quickly because rather than being used according to their strengths and gifts, they were plugged into an immediate need that was outside their comfort zone and just kept there. Like, for example, I've seen people who don't like kids being put in nursery ministry because we need somebody, and then 6 months later, they're still there. And I've seen some people being taken out of, the normal worship service, put in a ministry, and before you know it, they're volunteering during like the Sunday school or connection group hour, then they're having to volunteer during the worship service. They're not being fed or discipled either, and they don't feel like they fit, and they kind of fizzle out. Or it could be taking an introvert and putting them in the most extroverted ministry out there. How can the church begin to use people according to their strengths rather than just throwing them in a place where there's a need?
Yeah, that's a great question, and unfortunately a big problem. I think it starts with just identifying their gifts. And a simple way to do that is asking them to take a spiritual gifts inventory. Provide that as a church. And then also, one of the things we can do to be helpful is actually identify the roles, the serving roles in our church, and categorize those by spiritual gifts, so that someone who has the gift of administration doesn't find themselves in a room of toddlers where their gifts are not being used, and that's going to lead to burnout, but also they find themselves in a really fearful, panicked situation because they didn't want to be there in the first place, nor were they gifted by God or equipped to be there. And so sometimes we just need to give them a clear way to identify what gifts they have, and then give them a very clear description of the roles we have so that they know where they might find the most joy in serving. Other times, there are people, and I've had them come, and they've just been real honest of, I don't know what my gifts are, and I don't know where, just put me where you need me. And oftentimes, those are the people that end up where they don't want to be. And so I think it's fine to tell people, hey, you might find where your gifts are or where you have joy in serving just by serving. But give them a time frame. Let them know, hey, in a month, 2 months, 6 months, or a year, I'm going to come back and we're going to reevaluate. And if this isn't the best fit, we'll find something different for you. I would rather spend time with them, listening to their feedback and hearing for cues that a change might be necessary rather than having to replace them down the road. And so I think it's important that we identify what gifts they have. If they're still kind of open to serving anywhere, put them where they're needed most, but have a specific time frame where we check with them, we ask them how it's going, and we make a change if it's necessary.
Well, I'm going to ask you an uncomfortable question here, but I think it's something that people deal with all the time. You have people in the church or people anywhere that when you ask them to volunteer, they're just going to feel obligated to say yes, even when they don't feel like it. You have other people that are just going to say no automatically. As a church member, as a lay person in the church, how do I know when I need to stretch myself in something that might not feel comfortable? Or how do I know when I need to go ahead and say no because that really is outside my wheelhouse?
Yeah, I think every disciple of Jesus is called to make disciples of Jesus. And so if there's a need in the church, we're called to step in and fill that need. So first and foremost, I would encourage that person to stretch themselves, to say yes when an opportunity comes up, even if they don't feel gifted or equipped for it. Because it may be that they step into a world where they didn't know that they had gifts, but man, their gifts come to flourish. Or maybe it's just that meeting a need for a season in the church is a way that God strengthens their faith and strengthens their awareness of what he's doing beyond where their gifts normally would be used. I think it's important for us to say yes, right, as often as we can, because I think that we'll get into places where we see God moving, and that's what's most important. And then maybe we'll find joy in serving that we didn't know before.
That's really good. We're going to take a quick break. We will come back and continue talking with Matt Morgan.
Did you know that because of D6 Heroes, Randall House and D6 Family are able to equip families far and wide in the area of generational discipleship? Due to the financial gifts of both individuals and churches, D6 curriculum has been translated into multiple languages and distributed across the globe, including restricted access countries for use in the underground church. In short, because of the financial gifts of individuals like you, moms and dads all over the world can pass their faith to the next generation of believers. Would you consider becoming a D6 hero? A D6 hero is an individual who invests their financial resources in the ministry of Randall House and D6 Family to ensure that believers can transfer their faith through the church and home. Please visit d6hero.com to join the ranks of our heroes and to explore other areas where your financial investment can have an impact.
We're back, and we're talking with Matt Morgan about how to move from volunteer recruitment to leadership development. Now, I really want to focus in on that leadership aspect of things. You've talked about moving from volunteer recruitment to actually the leadership element of things. What does that process look like to go from just volunteer, the simple ask, to actually training leaders?
Yeah, so I think it starts kind of identifying what's the difference. So volunteer recruitment is about filling empty spaces. It's about filling the roles that are most needed in your ministry area. So really, we're looking for warm bodies to do what we need them to do most. On the other hand, leadership development, what it does is it's what we've been talking about. It's identifying the gifts of people. It's identifying the specific roles that the ministry needs and what gifts are best suited for those, and then matching the people together. As the development part is, that we give them a sense of knowledge, so we train them in the job. Then we give them experience doing the job, and then we give them some coaching. So this is the model that Jesus did. He would tell the disciples a truth or a practice, and then he would send them out to do it. And then when they came back and reported back, he would correct them or encourage them or give them further teaching. So it's a combination of knowledge and experience and coaching, and that's how we develop leaders. And I think the last level of that is that as ministry leaders, as pastors, we need other eyes and other ears to help us identify the gifts in people. And so we're looking for levels of leaders who recruit other leaders, develop and train other leaders, and eventually replace themselves as leaders.
Do you find that people respond differently when you kind of view them more as a leader rather than kind of labeling them as a volunteer?
Yeah, I don't know if the average church attender knows the difference of being called a volunteer or a leader. Mm-hmm. But I think as pastors, we know the difference.
Yeah.
And so I think it's more important for us to view our people as leaders and not just volunteers, that we view them more as leaders that are to be developed and stewards of the ministry rather than just people who are filling in needs.
Well, I want to end on this because I think this is an important question for church leaders to address, because it's so easy for volunteers and leaders to get burned out, especially if you get placed in that ministry where you just don't feel like there's a fit, and 6 months later you're like, I'm either going to have to change churches or change my personality. It's just not working. What are some ways we can care for our volunteers and encourage them and show them that they're loved and valued?
Yeah, so I've always tried in ministry, and I've asked my staff and those that serve with me to do three things: to make sure that volunteers are known, loved, and equipped. By knowing them, man, we get to know who they are, their family, their interests, their hobbies, spend time with those people. And then you love them by actually responding to those things, asking about those things, even in the ways that we appreciate them are very personal, that we give them gifts or shower them with praise that really speaks to the interest that they have. And of course, equipping them. Like, we need to make sure that they're trained for the job we've asked them to do, and regularly talking with them, meeting with them, and going, what do you need next to be better at what you're doing and feel more fulfilled and joy in where you're serving?
That's good. Well, final question. We're sitting here in April. Your prediction for the Mets season 2023. Go on record, because we're going to be able to listen to this later and see if you were right. What's happening with the highest payroll in baseball?
Here we go. Pete Alonso will be the NL home run leader, and the Mets will go to the NL championship but lose.
Ooh, who are they going to lose to?
I'm not going to say the Cardinals, even though you want me to say the
Yeah,
Cardinals. I think it's probably going to be the Dodgers.
Okay. Oh, Pete Alonso. I've got some thoughts on him, but that's for another podcast. Pete Alonso, Stubby Clapp, World Baseball Classics, different things like that. But now you're on record, though, so we will see how this pans out.
I hope they win the World Series, but I'll take whatever I get.
But Matt, I appreciate you sharing this with us. This is such an important topic because we do have people in our pews, in our congregations who are feeling burned out. But I think we also have people that are sitting there going, I want to get involved. I just don't know how. Or we have people that think that maybe they're not skilled or God has not equipped them. And that's just not true. God's equipped us in unique ways. As church leaders, we need to figure out how to use people. And I shouldn't say use people, but how to place people where they can be used for their strengths.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you sharing this. This is just great practical information, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
All right. So here's my question. I loved how Matt walked through the reasons people do not volunteer. He listed off a handful like time, fear, awareness, identity. I also argue that included in that list should be simple training. Like you don't have to get guys to drive the golf carts to and from the parking lots in our church because they look and go, I know how to do that. It's a safe space, But when you ask somebody to teach or you ask somebody to do security or greeting, they're scared they don't know all the answers and they've just got to be trained. What kind of training do you guys have in your churches for volunteers?
Well, I absolutely love that he brought up the spiritual gifts inventory because our church literally just did SHAPE, which is an old school, but it's a great one. And what I loved about this is there's been a lot of people in our church community that's been burned by other churches in this area. And they just it's kind of like shoving a square peg in a round hole type thing.
Yeah.
Well, we have these needs. And, this little one, you've got a high gifting here, so we're going to shove you into this. And something that my husband said to our community group through processing this was the reason why we're doing the SHAPE inventory is not so much that we can just plug you into the needs we already have, but as a church, how can we leverage your gifting? For the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And that set some people free in the room of like, oh my gosh, my church wants to leverage my gifting. And I think, we really try to, before we onboard any volunteer on the tech team, in the children's ministry, in the student ministry, in adult ministry, whatever that looks like, groups ministry, before we onboard anyone into any serving position, we want to make sure they understand what the expectations are and how to fulfill it and how to really be a leader, how to really have a vision for this role. The tech team amazes me because they're so technical, but listen, watching the tech team serve Jesus to make the gospel accessible to people who can't leave their house. I mean, guys, there's such power in that role. And when you are able to say, you know what, when you capture that video or when you do that little technical thing, you're literally being a part of the kingdom of God and you're furthering the gospel in that serving capacity. It's a powerful thing, very powerful thing.
One of the ways that we train is we are moving our training to a lot of video content because people aren't, like you said, one of the reasons people don't volunteer is time. So we are trying to make this and make this as easy as we can for them, the onboarding process. And we allow people to test drive ministries, after they figure out what they want to do. And we try to make it no pressure, like, hey, try this out. If this is not a good fit for you, no harm, no foul. We want to find some place that is going to be life-giving to you. And we're similar to you in our culture, Mary Ann. We have what we call a sit one, serve one mentality. If you serve, we want you to sit one. We're trying to get everybody every week for consistency in kids' classes and those kind of things. But hey, we want you worshiping every single week. And that even goes for us as pastors. We purposefully and intentionally sit towards the front where people see our staff sitting with our families in worship at least one service a week. So volunteers don't think, if I sign up for kids ministry, nobody will ever see me again, because, that tends to be the case in some churches. And I think we need to be careful not to delegate and dump we focus so much on the recruitment part, but we need to view people as not as a means to an end. Like, I don't need to fill this role. They are more than a serving a function or a need. Those are people, and we need to pour into them, check in on them, see how their lives are going, meet with them regularly, and find out how we can come alongside and encourage them in their calling.
Josh, that is so insightful. Delegate and dump versus circle back around and affirm them, maybe coach them up or coach them to say, hey, I'm learning from you, watching how great you're doing at this, whatever it is. I love that. Love that insights. So as we look to next week, we've got quite an impressive ministry leader who is a teacher, a leader of leaders, and has poured into many people's lives, like most of the people we interview on this podcast. We have Dr. Karen Kinnemer, and she is going to come and talk to us specifically about kids ministry, but also about the parenting side of kids ministry and the insights that we can glean from her. Can't wait for you guys to meet and learn from her next week on the D6 Family Podcast.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.